around exploded out there, and the whole corner of the building collapsed. And I could look right out and see the stars. The other guy and I, we hung an army blanket up and stuck it into the thing so at least we could shade it, because the only light we had was a candle. And the next thing you know, they blew my radio antenna down, because now I was actually out of touch with the world.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation, in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
Hey, Ethan Shanty is our producer, and he's with me in the studio as he often is at the beginning of our segments. Hi, Ethan.
Hi, Mitch. Mitch Teich, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks very much. And this is going to be a messy transition here, but a friend of mine died earlier this week, and
yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It was really a shock. He was not much older than me, and he was my longest serving friend in radio.
So you guys go way back into your careers.
We go way back to my first full-time job in radio in a small commercial station in a small town in Iowa. And I was the news director and he was the program director. And you've been in commercial radio in a small town before.
Yep, my very first radio job, it wasn't full-time, but my very first radio job was about as small as you can get. I was the afternoon country music host at a radio station in Potsdam that was in a trailer on the side of the road, with another trailer behind that trailer where the maintenance person lived.
Radio double wide.
Yes, it was for sure.
Well, the station that we worked at in Iowa was in a ranch house, actually.
It's always a strange. I mean, you know, NCPR is located in a hospital. Another one of my jobs was in a bridge and port building. A radio station is always in a weird place, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and it was a ranch house that I don't know whether they built expressly for this radio station. They did clearly have enough room that the tower was in the backyard, and we had to do transmitter readings and as we do here, but in a much different way because the transmitter was in a room that you got to off of the main studio.
Yep, same as mine. Yeah, doing that while we were listening to the NASCAR races on Sunday and stuff. It's a weird gig. Anyway,
yeah, a very weird gig, and and at the same time, it makes me happy that that's part of my radio history. Yeah. And I just in the couple of days since my friend passed, like the number of stories from we worked together for 18 months. He took a job in Gainesville, Florida, and then I moved on to Minnesota not too much longer after he left.
What was his name?
Pat Linton. And he had a radio name that was also Pat, but he went by Pat James later in life. He was Pat Linton in his on-air work in Iowa. There were just so many funny, weird stories of our shared time at this small commercial station in Iowa. And I got to thinking that with him gone, I'm still in touch with a couple other people I worked with at the time, but we are the keepers of those stories.
You're
now.
The living memory of Pat.
Yeah, and he was too young to be thinking, none of these stories make up a formal memoir. Yeah. And besides, he probably thought he had years of stories yet to accumulate.
Right.
And I got to thinking about that in the same way that, my dad passed away a few years ago, and I know yours did too.
I did too, yeah.
My dad had been writing essays in the last few years of his life about his experiences, not with the idea that they'd ever turn into a best-selling memoir someplace, but
just wanting to reflect, right?
Yeah, to reflect and
take stock.
Put those stories down on paper for his kids and his grandkids and the people he would someday leave behind. And I'm grateful he did that. When he passed away, my stepmom and my sister compiled and edited them into a book that family members and close friends have. And I know my aunt is doing the same thing with my grandmother's essays.
Yeah, that's really fantastic that you have that.
Yeah, I feel really lucky that I have that. I know it's something like over the holidays, we see commercials for things like Ancestry.com.
Right. Yeah.
But also there are services out there that will send you a prompt or your relatives a prompt and say, hey, what was your first pet?
And you write all that, and then at the end of the year they compile it into like a bound book. Yeah, and they send it to everybody.
Yeah. And in some ways, it seems a little artificial, but there are a lot of people out there that otherwise might never put these stories down on paper.
Right.
And so the reason we're having this conversation now is the guy we're going to hear from today is a 92-year-old man from the Croghan area named Harry Mitchell, who actually started writing essays when his family subscribed to something that gave him prompts, and they turned into a book for his family members. But then he kept writing essays, and his daughter reached out to me a few months ago to say, my dad is 92, and he grew up along the Beaver River, and his dad operated the Niagara Mohawk Power Plant at Effley Falls, and when his dad passed away, he took over operating that.
Okay.
And he has some wonderful stories to tell. And so back in September, I had a chance to go and visit with him in his home in Croghan and listen to him spin some yarns. And, it was really a unique opportunity to sit down and just have somebody tell me about their life. But yeah, his daughter was absolutely right. He tells a great story. She had sent me, he had written a fairly extensive essay about the history of power plants along the Beaver River.
Oh, okay.
And while that in and of itself was interesting, listening to him talk about his childhood, which we're going to hear in just a minute, and some really, both very funny and some heartbreaking times as well, really, I think, gives us all an opportunity to kind of bear witness to this guy's really interesting life.
Yeah. Kind of going back to your friend who you lost, we never know when those stories are going to, not to be crass, but to dry up. It's just something that you can't take for granted. And I know that, my personal experience, when I was at my very first full-time radio job, I started this bit with my dad, and every day he and I would talk on the phone for like 10 or 15 minutes, and we would record it. I would edit it down to like 2 or 2.5 minutes and air it on the station. And it became this 5-day-a-week thing we did called A Minute with the Old Man. And I saved all of them. I still have over probably 150, maybe closer to 250 of those conversations. And it was a lot of fun, and I wasn't thinking at the time about legacy. But now that he's gone, it's hard. To be honest, it's hard to listen to them because it's been 5 years since he's been gone, and that seems like a long time, but it's really short in other ways. So it's difficult to go back to those. But I know that I'm so thankful that I have them because there were, even though a lot of it was me and my dad just like shooting the breeze or like making stuff up off the top of our heads, and he would just like straight up lie about things. Like as it progressed, it became more and more of I'm going to tell you this story about my childhood, and a lot of times it was like, wow, I can't believe that you lived long enough to have kids because you did so many reckless things. But I'm so thankful that I have them. I can revisit those. I can revisit my dad anytime that I want. And one of the most, I think one of the most powerful moments in my whole life is we had his celebration of life, and my family asked me to play a bunch of those, and so we got to just like sit around and be with him for another afternoon. It was, you really can't take that for granted, and I would encourage everyone to actually write those stories down, keep a record of them. It's important.
So today's interview with 92-year-old Harry Mitchell will be presented in 2 acts. We're going to start with his reminiscing about his childhood growing up along the Beaver River with a power plant in his literal backyard, and also some harder times about when he returned from the service and took care of his dad who was dying at the time, and then we're going to take a little break and come back and hear him talk about his service in Korea. But first, we start along the Beaver River.
It wasn't all a happy life. Basically, it was happy. I could go back over now and think of all the time living up there at Effley. We were there. There was 5 of us in the family, and we lived right on the water, of course. The power plant was here, and the pond backed right up behind the house. and we spent all summer long in the water. We was swimming all the time, swimming, and Dad had made a raft, and we had it floated out away so you could go out there and you could dive on. You know, we just could. It was an enjoyable time. In the winter, well, winters became pretty dismal. But then on the other hand, the pond froze over, and then we'd keep teasing my dad, say, well, we want to go ice skating. And he said, well, you don't know if it's safe or not. Well, he had to go out first, chop a hole in the ice and find out if it was safe. And then I remember this term that he used. He said, well, the ice was probably that thick. And he come in and he said, well, there's 6 inches of ice will hold a team of horses. And I thought, really? I don't know what a team of horses weighs. I have no idea. But I know it was safe for us to go on. And I don't know what the limit is with people who know about that. They could tell you, they say, well, if ice is 4 inches thick, it's safe, or 2 inches, it's safe. But it's got to be 6 inches of ice. and then we'd go down, and so there again, in the wintertime, we'd scrape off and take the snow shovels down, and we'd shovel off a big area of ice, and then we'd skate. And we learned how to skate because we just did. And we'd skate until all hours of the night. In fact, it was night, like if it was like last night or night before when you had a nice bright full moon. Oh my God. You'd stay out there in the ice as long as you could. And the same way with swimming in the summer. We'd be in the water until Ma would be yelling at us that supper was ready, and she'd finally yell about the third time. And then we better get in there and eat if you're going to eat. So, it was way back when my dad was working there. As I mentioned, he worked shift work. When he was on the 4 to 12 shift, us kids could go down there and play in the plant because it was open then. This is long before World War II and the panic that set in, And he would let us come in there and play. But at the same time, he said, no, you can't climb on the generators and you can't go down in this switch room because they had some high voltage stuff in there. And there were certain places he said, you don't go. So you don't go because Dad said you don't. I remember one time we had a little red flyer wagon. Mm-hmm. Everybody had a wagon. And the number 4 generator, it was concrete floor, and the operators who worked there, they kept it clean and painted and shining. The goddamn floor was just glossy, and the brass on the machine, the brass fittings were all polished brass. They had nothing else to do, but the things were running by themselves. So, but we go down and we go around that generator with the wagon. Well, now, if you've ever ridden in a wagon, there's two ways of pushing it. Somebody can give you a ride, or you can tow them, or you can, I call it legging it, or one knee in it. You put one knee in and leg it, and you can propel yourself pretty good in that little wagon. Now, come time to stop, they did not have hydraulic brakes on those wagons. So the only way to stop it was to jam your foot in between the body and skid that back wheel. That's fine. But when you're on a nice concrete floor like that, you're just leaving a black mark all along.
Used to do that in my basement growing up.
Did you really? Well, you know what I mean. But then next time you go down, that black would be removed. It'd be nice and shiny. And apparently my dad just cleaned up after us and then again we'd go down when Ma would fix supper, again on the evening shift, whatever she cooked for supper, and then one of us kids would take it down to the plant and eat with my dad down there. So I spent a lot of time in the plant, so I was very familiar with it. When they offered me the job of going in there, I wasn't into a strange place. I was just going down there. I thought, hell, I know this place inside and out. I played hide and seek there.
Well, and little did you know when you were playing hide and seek that someday you'd be operating the plant.
That's right. But who knows? Who knows what the future holds? But in any case, that was it. And then my dad finally died, and I felt bad when, because I used to, as I mentioned earlier, we couldn't mention cancer in front of him. Nobody could say that C word, you know. I remember he'd want to go out for a walk. He was in a hospital bed, but he was active enough, he wanted to get out and walk. So I said, yeah, come on, I'll go out. So I'd help him put his shoes on and his clothes, and we'd go out and go for a walk. And we'd always walk over to the top of the hill. There was 59 steps leading down to the plant. I counted them every damn day. It was 59 concrete steps going down there. And we'd walk over to the top of the hill, and he just wanted to look down at the plant. And he just would stand there and just look down at the plant and look down at the river going down and this way and that way. And sometimes he'd say, I just don't know why I'm not getting any better. And that really broke my heart, because I wanted to tell him, Dad, you are not going to get any better. This is it, man. Face it, you know. I mean, Christ's sakes, be honest with the guy. He was a grown man, and he'd been through a war and losing his own father and everything else. I'm thinking, he's big enough that you could tell him that. And he would just probably say, well, okay, and let it go with that. And that's what it is. But no, you couldn't say anything.
Yeah, this was 1954.
Yeah, it was in 1954, and he died of June of that year. And he could still walk around, but then we had a hospital bed from the Legion, and we had that old house. There was a back room, you might say, a back room or a parlor area, whatever. We had him in there, and then we lived out in the other room. And because my other brother was not a person to help you out much, and my mother was, she was a good lady, but she just was, I think if someone was sick, she was not good, you know. And I wasn't either, but the fact that he laid there in bed, then he'd have to get up several times during the night. And so I slept on a couch out in the other room, and it was a metal bed, an old hospital bed, but he would take his fingernails and he would tap on the metal. He'd lean over and he'd tap on that metal. I sleep. When I sleep, the guys in the service used to say, you don't sleep, you die for 8 hours, because I don't hear anything. Well, then he used to get disgusted with me because I couldn't hear him. And I thought, well, we got to rig up something for him. So we had a metal cup out in the cupboard for some reason or other. So I took a string and tied it to the bed thing, and now you could take that metal cup and bang it against the side of the metal. I'm pretty sure I could hear that. And so I had to get up several times in the night, and he'd bang his on the cup. And maybe he just wanted his pillow flipped over. Maybe he had to go to the bathroom, whatever. And it was hard for him, I know that, because he took care of his mother and father, his mother, and she had 10 kids, and he was young. He was like the second child born, but he was always doing something for his sisters. So he was a man who took care of somebody else. So it was hard for him to be taken care of. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you know somebody that's been in that situation. Maybe you are, you know. In any case, there was a time he wanted to go to the bathroom. So we had a coffee can, and I had to hold the coffee can for him so he could pee in it, and then, and so on. And I noticed at the time, maybe not the first time, maybe not every time, but this time I looked up at him, and as I was sitting down there, squatted down, holding the coffee can for him, I looked up and he had tears in his eyes, and I thought, this has got to be hard. This has got to be hard. It would be damn hard for me.
It must have been hard for you as his son.
I was, I don't know, my early 20s. But at that year, 54, I was 20 years old. I was born 22 years old. I was born in 32. Yeah, it was kind of hard, and yet, but because I felt so sorry for him, and then because here we are kidding ourselves, maybe thinking we're kidding him into thinking he's going to be fine. You're all right. All you got to do is sit in bed, and Harry will hold your cup for you. Here, hold that. But that's it. When I looked up, and he had these tears in his, and I never saw my father like that before. Never did. He was a strong man, and he was himself. You know. That was hard. That was just hard.
Well, and this was 70 years ago, but the way you describe it, it sounds like it was yesterday, and it's so vivid in your mind.
Could have been. Yeah, it could have been. Growing up at Eafley was, I guess I loved it.
That's 92-year-old Harry Mitchell, recorded on site in his living room in the Croghan area. And this is Mitch Tyke back in the studio here on Northwards. We're going to hear another excerpt from my conversation, and our producer Ethan Shanty here again for just a minute. You know, it's funny, when I got into radio, I remember going out on a story with a coworker of mine in about, oh gosh, this would have been 1994, maybe 1995.
I was 6 or 7 years old.
Well, and the amazing thing is, we were working in Minnesota, and he was doing a story linked to the dedication of a World War I memorial in Minnesota.
Okay.
But he found a veteran of World War I who was living across the border in Wisconsin.
Okay.
So we drove like 4 or 5 hours, I think, to get to this guy's house, and he showed us his medals and told stories of World War I. And it didn't dawn on me at that point that, you know, I would be in radio long enough that the last of the World War I veterans would go, and there are just a handful of World War II veterans that are that are still, you know, telling stories out there. And Harry Mitchell served in Korea, as he mentioned in passing in the first part of our interview today, and you know, he's 92, and there are not a lot of other, you know, Korean War veterans out there that are left, and so I thought it was important to hear him talk a little bit about his service. So there's some gruff moments in here, and some scenes that might be a little difficult to listen to, but their stories well told, and I'm glad we have a chance to hear them.
I was trained as an artillery surveyor. I went to basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I was trained to be a surveyor. Used an old girly transit, and we'd transit and go back and forth. I didn't, because I'm an obstinate bitch, I guess, but we were all in the field. Now I'm talking about basic training with these transit, and there's a highway going by. So I would, and you got wheels, you can turn this to rotate it, you know, back and forth. And I'd look through the scope on the transit, and I would find a car going by, and I would turn the wheels and see if I could keep up with him all the way. Now that's my training. I didn't pay attention to anything. I had no real interest. I didn't want to be a surveyor. However, when I got out of there, I had the title of an artillery surveyor. When I went to Korea, I was in a mortar outfit, and I don't know if you know what mortars are. You drop the round down the tube.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course.
Well, they fired in artillery method. Consequently, I was an artillery surveyor. Well, I was a great candidate there, I guess. So, even though I had never seen a mortar in basic, I had never seen a mortar in my life. Had little idea what the hell they do. But anyway, we got over to Korea. I was in Japan, and we had to get assigned. They assigned me to the mortar battalion. So I went over, and everybody, we had a whole truckload of us, or we were just replacements, come into the battalion, and everybody was scattering around and running and going here and there, and there was several Jeeps and a 3/4 ton truck, and a bunch of guys would go over to this one, and a bunch of guys would go to that one, a bunch of guys would go to this one. They were all assigned and had their orders. And then when they all left, I was standing there alone. I thought, Christ, I feel like the last kid picked for a baseball team, you know? Here I'm sitting here. And I thought, what the hell am I doing here? So I didn't know even where to go. I mean, I was 20 years old, 19 years old. So I walked around and I thought, well, somebody must know what's going on. So I walked around a little bit and I see some guy come along. He had sergeant stripes on. So I said, hey, Sarge. I said, what are they keeping me here for? He said, what's your name? And I told him, and he looked on the list and so on. Oh, he said, I think the colonel wants to keep you here as a clerk. I said, as a clerk? You got to be kidding me. I can't even read my own writing. And there was no computers or anything like that. I mean, you had a handwriting. I said, oh my God. And the second thing, the most
and so did you end up being a clerk?
No, hell no. I told that sergeant, I said, listen, I can't even read my own writing. I know nothing about being a clerk. I don't want to stay here. And he said, well, I'm going to give you a bed for the night. And then he put me on guard duty. I'm walking around with a goddamn rifle with it. Probably wasn't even loaded. I'm walking around. So he signed me to a place where I could get sleep. He said tomorrow morning, he said, go in and see the colonel. And he said, tell him what you want. He says, I'm sure he can help you. And I thought, yeah, you ain't sure. So next morning, I couldn't wait till morning came. And I went over to the orderly room, knocked on the door, identified myself. And I said, I want to see the colonel. Oh, okay, what did you want to see him about? And I said, oh, it's personal information, whatever. So pretty soon they said, yeah, the colonel will see you. So they opened the door and I went in, saluted the colonel. And he says, hey, son, how can I help you? Now, he was being a nice guy. And that gave me the opportunity to be nice with him and not be standing there at attention. You know, I think he told me to relax. He said, what do you need, son? And I said, you got me down here to be a clerk, a battalion clerk. And he said, yeah, that's right. Because he said, you were a surveyor. And I said, yeah, I took artillery basic surveying, but I can't tell you that I learned anything. And I said, I'm going to tell you right now. I said, I don't want to be a damn clerk. He said, I said, I can't even read my own writing, much less have somebody else read it. And I said, because I'm a lousy writer and I can't type. So I said, I've got no qualifications to be. He said, well, what would you like? I said, well, I just come out of basic training. And I said, I want to see some action. I said, to be perfectly frank with you, I said, I was taught to kill people. I want to go kill somebody. And I'm ready for it. He said, well, you want to go up online? And I said, yeah, I want to go online. And he says, well, that's dangerous up there. He said, people are getting hurt up there. And I said, sir, I said, I'm 19 years old. Danger doesn't even enter into my vocabulary. Have you ever been talked to a kid who was 19 years old and said it was dangerous? What dangerous? It can't be. You know what I mean? So he says, well, that's what you really want. And I said, yes, sir, that's what I really want. And he says, okay. And that talked out of that. Well, next morning there was a Jeep out there, and then some kid come over and he said, you, Mr. Mitchell, or Corporal, or Private Mitchell? I said, yeah. So he said, come on, you're going with me. So I went to Charlie Company up on the line, and I loved it. That's what I want to be, where the action is, Sitting back there as a damn clerk. No, that didn't appeal to me at all. And there was underlying reasons. I had learned that in my basic and while I got a lot of indoctrination. when you go to Korea, there was point zones in the 4-point zone. Now that's where battalion was in a 4-point zone. And then you go up to the company, and they're in a 3-point zone. But then you go up, if you're online, now you're in like a 2-point zone. Oh, now, so that doesn't mean anything except that now you have to, or they tell you that after you accumulate 36 points, you can rotate and go home. Well, you can't do the math very easy, but it's 4-point zone I'm in down here. That you can figure that's 12 months anyway, isn't it? And now if you go up to company and they get a 3-point zone, it's a little less. But then you go up online, and you're out of there in a short time. So that's where I wanted to be. That's where I wanted to be. And I got up there, and I liked it. I really enjoyed myself. But yeah, you got in trouble sometimes. I mean, there was things I did, like there was a gal down here the other night. She said something about being dangerous, and I said, I guess she was talking about Charlie out here is not feeling all that well, and well, at our age, death is the next step, And I told her then, I said, all my life, and especially in Korea, I've faced death on several occasions. I've looked it right in the eye. And I said, it did not scare me. And I said, so it doesn't scare me today. I know that I might die right this afternoon, maybe. It's going to be hell on her. She'll be on hell, but it ain't going to bother me none. So I took combat was what it was. And I have something in my brain that makes me do these things, but maybe everybody does, I don't know. But if something happens, like if you all of a sudden you just drop your glass and it smashed all over the floor, oh my God, that glass broke. That happened, but that's past already. It's already done. I can't stop it. You can't stop that glass from breaking. So now you think, okay, that happened. Now what do I do to get out of it? Now what do I do? Now you pick it all up. So that's the way I always thought. And so when crap would happen in Korea and we get I wasn't scared. Just wasn't. There was only once that I was, but it goes into that. That's another story. But yeah, things didn't scare me. There was one time it was really, in fact, I was terrified. But that's the only time. But once I got through that, and
what terrified you?
Nothing scares me anymore.
What was the one time you were terrified?
Well,
if you don't mind my asking.
That's all right. No, I don't mind at all. I wrote it all down. I mean, it's common knowledge. All my time in Korea, with our motors, you had to have a forward observer, because we were behind the hill, and we always located the motors behind the hill, and you were shooting over the hill at some target. But the only way you knew what that target was having a guy up on the hill looking around with a scope and telling you where you're going, At the same time, usually you had to be a lieutenant, I think, to be a forward observer. I was a corporal. But I was also a radio operator, and then that's what they wanted the most, was a radio operator. So they said, you go up there, and so I got we call it going up on the hill. I go up on the hill a lot of time with a forward observer. And this one time, we were facing the Chinese at that time, and it was no big deal. But I got a call on the radio, and here's this all secret stuff. And this is our colonel, or the company commander down in the company, called me on the radio, and he said, do you see any new faces up there? I thought, what the hell are you on? New faces? I got a bunch of Koreans around here, they're, if you want to call them new. I said, no, there's nobody new faces or anything. Well, then I found out It was all secret. It was, oh my God, it was top secret. At 11 o'clock that night, or 2,300 hours, as we in the Army likes to put it, the 45th Division is going to relieve the 3rd ROK Division, ROK, ROK, Republic of Korea Army. And they were our people we were with up on the hill. 11 o'clock at night came, and there was nobody in there. I mean, we didn't have any. Where was the relief that was supposed to be here? Well, the Koreans, they just said, okay, I'm out of here, and they just left. So on that particular location, there was only 3 guys, myself, the forward observer, and another guy I came along with as a helper or something, but Herky, and there was only 3 of us on the hill. Well, coincidentally, as soon as these Koreans pulled out at 11 o'clock, 2,300 hour, all of a sudden we started getting the shit kicked out of us. And then because the Chinese knew, it was top secret, of course. Of course they knew. But then they just shelled the hell out of us. And there was nothing you could do but hunker down. And I had the radio, and we lived in a little bunker, cut out of the side hill. Dirt, all dirt. And the round exploded out there, and the whole corner of the building collapsed. And I could look right out and see the stars. And I thought, holy shit, this is great. So the other guy and I, we hung an army blanket up and stuck it into the thing so at least we could shade it. Because the only light we had was a candle. And the next thing you know, they took the telephone line went out. That goes out right away. And then the next thing, they blew my radio antenna down, because now I was actually out of touch with the world. There wasn't anything you could do. There's nobody you could holler to or talk to. There's no way of contacting them. And they just continued. The Chinese just shelled the hell out of us. And it was uncomfortable. It wasn't scary, but it was uncomfortable. Well, then after that round went out and they took my blanket and we stuck that up, I felt I had to stay by the radio. This is nonsense. The radio was dead, so what the hell could I want to sit by it for? And the FO, forward observer, he hunkered down up in his place. It was a sandbag place, and he just hired it in there. And I was alone in that room. And that's when I got scared to death, because they were shelling us, and it was hitting us all over the place, and I was all alone in this damn room with a blanket hanging over there, and I had an M2 carbine, and I sat there where my radio was like right here, and I had a chair or something to sit in, so I just sat there in that thing and flipped that thing on M2, which is full automatic, and you can put it off of that and you just fire 1 round at a time. If you put it on M2, flip the switch over on the carbine, it just becomes a machine gun. As long as you hold the trigger down, she'll just empty it. Well, I had a 30-round clip in there, and it was just barely a light enough to see with that damn candle burning. And all of a sudden I saw the blanket move, and I thought, Jesus, it's somebody feeling along the wall, and he feels this blanket. And I thought, oh man. And then I was scared because I didn't know, I knew someone was out there, and I thought, next thing they're going to do, what I would have trained to do, is simply, I would have rolled a grenade in, throw the grenade in, and then you can go on in and shoot them up, whoever's there. And he didn't do it. And then it just moved once, and it was still. And then because I guess that terrified me, because then I didn't know. I didn't have something to, it wasn't like being in an electric storm, it's right there. This was not right there. I didn't know what was right there. And I didn't know enough to do anything else but just sit there and hold my breath all night. And the whole damn night I sat with that M2 car being set on full automatic, and I swung it around and pointed it toward that curtain, and I thought, I don't know who that was, but it wasn't friendly. And I said, if that curtain moves again, I'm just flipping this thing automatic, and I'm just dumping 30 rounds into that hole, and whoever the hell is there has got it. And they're going to come back in after me, but I'm going to get a piece of them. Old saying going, our colored guys that I went to basic with, some guys say, well, you're going to get a meal off of me, but I'm going to get a sandwich off of you. You know, that's okay. That's the way it went. That was that kind of that thing. That was my idea, and I was scared, shitless. I mean, I ain't got afraid to tell you. I was scared to death. And I was 19 years old, and I'm sitting in this damn dirt hole, and that curtain or that blanket had moved, and I thought, boy, because I could barely see it with a candle. But I thought, if it moves again, I'm dumping this whole clip into that. Well, they stopped firing at us. I don't know why they quit. I have no idea. And I still sat there the whole night. I was just like frozen. My eyes were frozen open. And then along toward daylight, I could hear some noise. There's a trench went right by our hoochie that we were in. We called it a hoochie. And it was daylight out, just breaking day. So I thought, man, I don't know who's out there in the trench, but I better take this carbine and look out there and find out, because if it ain't somebody I know, they're dead, you know. So I went out and said it was a couple of commo guys, communication people. They ran our wire, and one was Jack McQuaid from Pittsburgh. I liked him, nice fella. And I saw him through the light, and I said, Jack, what in the hell are you doing up here? And he said, well, they told me your telephone was out. And I said, well, it is. He said, well, we come up to fix it. And I said, well, thanks a lot. You know, so they ran new wire up for us and put our telephone in, and I don't know, there was other people coming up then, and it was right after that finally the 45th got there. The guys come up the trench with their rifles on their machine guns on the shoulder and stuff. And then I stood there in our opening. Now I had a radio, and they had stopped firing on us. So things were returning back to somewhat normal.
Harry Mitchell grew up and still lives in the Croghan area, has spent almost his entire life in the North Country except for his service in Korea. His interview took place in his living room in the Croghan area as well, and you can see pictures of him serving in Korea and more at our website, ncpr.org/northwards. Ethan Shanty, our producer, is back in the studio with us to share the names of all the people who make this show possible.
Thanks, Mitch. Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, produced, and edited by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me. I'm Ethan Shanty. Our theme music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. By the way, next week we will be taking off, but we will return in the new year with a new edition of Northwards. You can find out more about this program and listen to past episodes at ncpr.org/northwards. For North Country Public Radio, I'm Ethan Shanty. This is NCPR.